All right, Anneke. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I was just thinking, who connected us? Was it through a publicist or a friend? I mean, I get referred people all the time. I can't get track.
Yes, it was Nicole Smith. She works
Okay.
for Room to Read, and I think she had at one point connected with you, and she said she wasn't the right person for the show, but after talking to you, she thought I was the right person for
Oh,
your
okay.
show.
So
So
she was
she, I
referred
think,
to me, and then
yeah,
she
so
referred
she,
you.
yeah,
Okay.
so I think she contacted you about me, and you said, yeah, let's talk, and then we connected that way. So
Okay, great. Well, I'm always, obviously this is an entrepreneurial podcast, but education and how we teach our children and all the things that we do, because it is always of interest to me. I think that to a large extent, we still teach our children like it's 1945, I mean, I should say we took a very big leap in the last
I
year.
was going to say this year, it's like,
It's not anymore,
completely different.
Yeah. And now, now tablets and laptops and connectivity is there.
Yeah.
It's sad to say, but we kind of needed that push. I mean, we didn't want to have 500,000 people die in the process, but I mean, the schools, I think our educational system will be better off for it. But I want to go into like your background and, where you grew up and your education, because I know it's a little bit different than where you ended up.
Right, very different. Yes.
I told you I went to Cornell, so I won't hold it against you that you went to Princeton, but we're Ivy Leaguers. And yeah, and let's talk, because your stories are interesting. What you're doing with kids is interesting too.
Great, great. Well, I guess starting at the beginning then, my parents were immigrants from Belgium, but I actually grew up in the United States. So I grew up outside of Boston,
Okay.
and but did spend quite a bit of time going, going back and forth to Europe, because really all my relatives and all my family was there.
Right.
And I guess one thing I will say, because I was thinking a little bit about this, and really I've done a lot of different things, and definitely where I ended up is not where I intended to end up. But when I look at kind of a thread that goes between everything that I've done, is sort of this interest in other cultures, in other languages, in learning about other people's experiences. So to me, that's always brought like a certain amount of kind of richness, I guess, to my life.
Right.
And when I was thinking back about, as a child, so my father was actually, he came here to study, and ended up becoming a professor. And
Okay.
because we had no family, whenever it was Thanksgiving, he would have a lot of his students that didn't have somewhere else to go.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
even
Yeah,
growing
sure.
up, our Thanksgivings were not, Thanksgiving with a lot of direct family. It was Thanksgiving with, families from India and Asia and South America. And
Right.
so really, I kind of had that part growing up. And so I always, all years had an interest. I studied a couple of languages. And then when I went to college, I ended up majoring in international affairs with a minor in East Asian studies.
That all makes sense.
Yeah. So,
Right.
and, and I was very interested. I actually started studying Japanese when I was there, because I wanted to learn a language that was completely different. Everything else I had learned was more European languages.
Right. Roman-based
And
languages.
so, so that was really interesting. And then, of course, I got to know a lot of, Japanese people through that process. Had an opportunity a couple times over the summer to go to Japan. And then when I graduated, I actually decided to go into management consulting of all things.
Right.
But I chose the company I worked for did a lot with like international companies.
Okay.
And so there was still that interest. And
Right.
And so I started actually in Boston. I went back to Boston to live for a bit, but then had an opportunity to move to Japan, where they had like an affiliate company.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was pretty much the only, I guess, non-Japanese person in this management consulting group in Japan.
But this was a division.
It was,
Of
yeah,
this
well, it was
global
actually
company, I
all globally. It was at the time Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu.
Oh, it was part of Deloitte. Okay.
Yeah. So Tohmatsu was the Japanese division at
Got
the
it.
time.
Okay.
And so they were primarily an accounting firm, but they had like a group that was also consulting.
But you were the only American, Anglo-Saxon, white person there. Everyone else was Japanese?
In the consulting division.
In the division.
So there were some
Okay.
people that did accounting, did accounting for like expats and things. So that was a completely different group. So we didn't really honestly interact that much.
Now, do you speak fluent Japanese?
Well, at the time I spoke Japanese very well.
Okay. I'm sure it's the kind of language, if you don't use it.
Yeah, if I
becomes
can be
difficult.
honest,
Yeah.
yeah, if I can be honest, that was a number of years ago. I'm not that
Right.
young anymore, so I have lost it.
It's
I'm
hard to
hoping
keep up
one
with it.
day,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, you kind of living there really, really helps. And so writing and reading, I would not say I was fluent, but I was pretty good conversationally. And so a lot of the work we did, or that I did there, I would work with teams where we were working with companies who were interested in either like American companies or
Mhm.
UK companies that were interested in doing business in Japan, or Japanese companies that were interested in doing business in the US or the UK. So it was always good to have an
Got
English
it.
speaker there as well,
Right.
because the client was
Right. Well,
usually,
even the language, isn't it? I don't know, goes down. It doesn't go like English. It goes down the page or the other way, like Hebrew. I don't know. It's different, isn't it?
yeah, well, traditionally it does go down. The very
It
traditional
went,
old
yeah,
Japanese went down the
but not
page,
anymore.
but not anymore. No,
Now it
no,
goes
like
regular.
unless you go old, the older books. But there's different, like there's different. What makes it challenging is there's kind of like different alphabets in there. So there's something called hiragana, which is like a phonetic alphabet. And then there's something called katakana, which is also a phonetic alphabet, but it's more for like foreign words. And then they use Chinese characters, which to me is honestly the hardest part, was the Chinese character. The other two are just, a phonetic alphabet. You learn them and eventually, and you know them. But the characters, there's just so many of them. So that's what I think made that language
Even
challenging.
harder than English, because people say English as a Roman-based language is very difficult. We have exceptions to everything.
Yes, yes. Actually, my parents have said that, because in
Yeah.
Europe, they all learn so many languages, and they said English was actually tough because of all the exceptions,
Yeah.
and the unique cases and whatnot. So if you're not a native speaker, it's to us, it just we
Right.
speak it,
But none of that
some other-
translates to any kind of Asian dialect at all, right?
other than like I said, this phonetic alphabet, the katakana in Japanese, where, for example, the word beer, they didn't really have that before, so it's biru. Or like computers, which it didn't
Because they
exist, but
adopted,
it was
right?
computer,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Okay.
That's about it. So
That's
yeah,
about it.
otherwise
Okay.
you're pretty much going from scratch.
That's
But
funny.
anyway, so it was, I was in my 20s. It was great.
Yeah, it was
It was
probably a great
fun.
place to be, right?
Yeah, I will say the nice thing about going there and speaking Japanese, was that I really did get to know some Japanese people very well, because there was a fairly large, foreign community there. There's a lot of people in investment banks and whatnot.
Right.
But by being able to speak the language, you can really, just get to know the Japanese more. And I did have a family that more or less kind of adopted me.
Oh, nice.
I didn't live with them, but
Right.
I got to know them really well. I think I was on their Christmas card one year. And so, we would go to dinner a lot, and we would sometimes vacation together and things.
Right.
So that was really, made it a
Right.
much
If you
more
don't speak
special
the language, you probably
opportunity.
spend all your time with the people from your
Gaijin.
company or
Yeah.
expats. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
gaijin, they call them, the
Gaijin.
foreigners. Yeah. So of course I've, spent time with them as well, but it was nice to have the mix there. So it was great. But I will say, after 3 years there, I was kind of ready to come home and sort of thinking about what's the next step. And so that's when I went to business school. But I was, again, not totally ready to give up the international piece. So I actually ended up, getting an MBA, but I did a joint master's program in international business as well. And so
Okay.
actually some of that combined, part of that was actually going to Japan, and, working with other people who had focused on other languages as well. And so, so I was there a couple of years doing that. And then it's funny, because I do believe I started having an entrepreneurial bug already at that time.
Okay.
But because I remember going, and this was before kind of entrepreneurship was all
Right.
the
It was like a
rage.
French word that
Right,
nobody knew what
right.
entrepreneur was.
And there was no
True.
major, now
Right.
I think a
No,
lot of
there's
the
no
business
curriculums
schools,
for that
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
So because I remember going with some students, and we went to the dean and said, we want to kind of, and they were very flexible, and in terms of trying to create a major that worked for
Yeah,
you
you'd have to
there.
create your own.
Exactly. And that's what we did. You would say, we want to take some, courses in new product development and things that would kind of, maybe prepare you more for eventually doing something in entrepreneurship. Now, this was also, though, before the big, all the .coms came
Right.
up. So I will say that I had that interest in entrepreneurship, but I did not have the idea of what I
Right.
wanted to do. And, perhaps had I graduated a few years later, and that's when all those .coms were, kind of coming up, maybe I would have joined some kind of a .com, because it
Yeah.
would
I
have
mean,
been very much
timing's
at the
everything.
beginning. But it was before that. And so, kind of thinking what I wanted to do, I thought about going back to consulting, but I felt like I wanted to do something more, where I was in a company where I had ownership of, a product and a group, and not just I'm doing a project and then I'm going on to the next company, which was very much what consulting
That's what
was like.
consulting is. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I ended up actually going to AT&T, right? The opposite of entrepreneurship, a very
Makes
large
sense.
company,
Right. Very large.
very large. But actually, one of the things I really liked about AT&T was it did, in part maybe because it was so large, you could really do a lot of different jobs at the company. And you could you really could kind of almost have your own group in there that you were managing, and then go on and get a different experience. So one of my early experiences was actually doing marketing. It was international consumer long distance, but we worked with, um, I was basically managing the marketing to the Polish speakers in the US, Russian, Arabic.
Right.
So
Because they want to call their relatives or
yes,
whatever.
exactly. So I was dealing with these, communities in the US, these ethnic communities in the US.
I assume that that's the only long distance that's left, right? Country to country.
Well,
There's no
yeah,
long distance within the
yes,
country. Yeah.
this is not a job that exists anymore
Right.
in that company.
Right.
But at the time, it was actually one of the few companies that actually had the money to market to those individuals. But actually, what's interesting is this does end up tying back into sort of where I ended up, because I was getting to know different ethnic communities in the US that I had not had really much exposure to in the past. But I kind of left that job, and then I did a lot of jobs in the international division, more that was doing negotiation with other like international telecommunication companies,
But still at AT&T.
but still at AT&T. So I
Got it.
was there for, I would say, like almost 9 years. And I would say, I had a really great mentor who, helped me a lot, giving me different opportunities. I
Right.
had some really good bosses. Um, what was interesting there is I did do some great travel, so I have no regrets about that time. I feel like I learned a lot. I learned a lot about managing
Right.
teams. Um, but I remember there was something in me that I felt like I needed to do something a little more creative, you know. I used to do a lot of just for fun, artsy things, writing, and I had been so busy with work that I kind of felt like I was losing that part of
You were
me.
an artist by
No,
hobby?
I'm not a good
No.
artist. It was just for enjoyment.
Yeah, that's what I mean by
know,
hobby. Yeah.
by hobby. I
Yeah.
used to write a little and just do crafts and things like that.
Yeah.
And I kind of had stopped doing all of that with all these years of work. So I actually decided I started, I took some classes in children's book writing and graphic design, and
Right.
children's book illustrations, purely for fun, not thinking this was going to become a job, just because I wanted to do something that was a little more creative. So I was kind of doing that, occasionally at nights or weekends or whatnot while I was working.
Right.
And so again, not really thinking this would necessarily become a job. And then at the same time, because I always had this interest in languages, I was just always reading about language learning, and reading about immigrants, and at that time there was a lot of information about like English language learners, and how it was so important for them, in order to get good at English, to develop skills in their home language first. So in other words, to be able to read with their family in the language that their family is most comfortable in. And even if that's not English, that's fine, because a lot of the literacy skills kind of transfer over into learning English.
So if
So
you don't have that base, going into like
exactly.
an ESL program, it's
Exactly.
more
It's much
difficult.
harder.
Much
Yeah.
harder.
And there was, some hard data and research that was really important. And actually what was interesting is, like, there were a lot of people were still feeling like, oh, just, they're in America, learn
Yeah,
English,
suck it
completely
up.
ignore the language. And
Yeah,
even some of the families were not necessarily reading with the kids because they were
right.
thinking, oh, this isn't,
Right.
it's
We
going to
want them to be
confuse my
American,
child.
right? Speak. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. But it
Exactly.
actually was holding them back and they didn't know it.
So exactly, exactly. So there was all this data saying how important home language reading was. And so again, I'd been doing these things with children's books and I thought, that's kind of interesting. And I started looking at libraries. Well, what is available for these families?
Yeah. Market research.
Yeah, so you want to tell, the Gujarati speaking student they should read Gujarati at home. Well, you go to the library and there
What's
wasn't really anything in
Gujarati?
Gujarati. Oh, that's one of the Indian languages,
Okay.
you
See, I
know
never even heard of it.
or Hindi, or you were to
Yeah.
tell, the Vietnamese student that they should read at home. But whenever I
But
would go
there's
to
nothing, there's no
libraries,
available,
there was
nothing
nothing
available.
there.
Yeah.
Now again, I'm sure you were going to the New York City library,
Well,
certain
obviously, but most
cosmopolitan places.
Americans
We're not
don't
getting
have,
access to them.
yeah, of course not. I mean, nowadays, I
Exactly.
guess you can get even for a charge, but you get anything on the internet, right? You can find anything, but
That's true. There's more.
it's
Yeah,
a little
there is
different.
more available now.
Right.
But anyway, that was honestly the spark for
Yeah.
Language Lizard. So I think it was kind of a combination of having, done sort of that research and seeing there was a need. And then also myself feeling at some point that even though, I really liked the people I was working with at AT&T, I was getting good, interesting experiences.
Right.
There's
It's still
just something
corporate
in
though.
me that felt
Yeah.
like
It's still
I
corporate.
wanted to do something,
I mean, there's still a
different.
structure you have to kind of adhere to. There's only so much creativity in a large corporation. They have processes they have to
Yeah.
follow. And
Yeah.
so you didn't accidentally become an entrepreneur. You were kind of feeling your way and looking for them. You accidentally ended up in children's books, kind of, right?
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that's accidental. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I do,
It's
and
a discovery process. I mean, you discovered something that was like, huh.
it really is. And that's what I say. Sometimes I talk to, sort of newer business school students or undergraduates or whatnot. And now again, everybody's got the programs in entrepreneurship. And they say, well, how do you become an entrepreneur? And I said, sometimes like maybe you'll be lucky and right when you graduate you'll get the great idea
Not
and you'll
usually the
create it,
case though.
or
Yeah.
you'll do the research and you'll find some holes. But
Right.
a lot of times the way it comes up is because you're doing something, maybe you're doing something with a larger company or mid-sized company, or you read some article or whatnot, and then you see there's a need here. And actually
Right.
if you have some experience in that particular industry or field, you may be better equipped to meet that need, or you may have the contacts
Yeah.
to meet the
And you
need or
you
help grow your
notice it
company.
because other people might not see it.
Exactly,
But I think 9
exactly.
times out of 10, it ends up being something that you don't expect. Like what you're doing, you're working, you like what you're doing. And then you started saying, you know what, I want to do something a little bit more creative. So you just went, writing books and illustrating, whatever. But you were, you had that world view. And then you just kind of stumbled along it and said, well, if that makes sense, I mean, can these people get the, I mean, it just kind of followed its way and it wasn't the path you thought you were
Right,
going down, right?
right.
Yeah, I think that's very
Exactly,
common.
exactly. That's
So I
why
think people have to be open to those kind of processes that happening
yes,
more so than
yes.
they should. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just the thing, what I would say for younger people is like, just, get experience. Go someplace where no matter what you're doing, you're learning
Right.
something.
Do
And it
stuff.
it may
Right.
not be the topic that you're absolutely most passionate about, but then you know what, go to a conference of that topic. But at
Right.
the same time, make sure you're learning and then try to get into areas that are of greater interest to you. And like you said, keep your eyes open. Just keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, read a lot. I mean, I will say, I
Yeah.
think, sometimes people are spending too much time on the video games and stuff because it's amazing what you
Oh
learn
yeah.
when you read,
Even through the podcast, because I have so many authors and
Yeah.
on the,
Yeah, it's
I got like
listening to
4 books
podcasts.
here. I got 3 books
Exactly.
on my Kindle, 2 books on the car and audio,
Exactly. It's
and
just,
it's just an immersion of all kinds of materials. And there's so much great stuff out there, especially
yes.
nowadays that you can look. I think that there's people that try, you got to try stuff. You might find out you like it. You might find out there's aspects of you like, you might hate it. So, but you have to kind of, that's not a failure, but you have to kind of push that aside to find other opportunities as you're moving forward. What do I say? If you want to get hit, you got to play in traffic. I mean,
Exactly.
you just don't know who's going to
Exactly.
hit you. So you got to get out there, but it's true. I mean, a lot of the
Exactly.
kids, I get kids call me too. They want an internship. They want this, what do you want to do? Well, I want to do this.
Right.
Okay. But you have no experience and you got to get out and just like you said, my son's an informatics major, you know, and informatics is with data, big data. It's
Oh,
basically
okay.
the
Yeah.
study of AI, big data and systems
Okay.
and
Okay.
analytics and how we make decisions and so forth.
That's a good
So it could
field.
be used. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
goodness. I don't have to support him for the rest of my life. He can
Right.
support me. But yeah, almost in any field, right? In children's fields and in any field, because they need
Right.
data to make decisions. Well, I told him just find somebody who's going to bring you in a company and let you do whatever you're going to do and follow people around and learn from them and listen and see what's going on in the world. Because you and I both know we didn't really, I mean, great, Princeton's a great university, and so is Cornell. We didn't really learn too much. Like we could just go out and be on our own for the rest of our life, never
Right.
leave the learn.
Right.
It's like a thinking. It's like an exercise
Right.
in
They would say
learning
you
how to
learn how to
think.
learn, right? Learn
Right.
how to
You
think.
learn how to
Yep.
learn. That's what law school did. You don't learn how to
Yeah.
practice law.
Right.
You learn how to be
Right.
analytical and read things and digest them. So it's
Right.
all a
Right.
it's all a learning process. So I think you're right. You just gotta get out there, get
Yeah.
exposed to things.
Yeah. Yeah. Do something and be interested,
Right. Be
be interested in other
interested.
people's
Right.
stories, be interested in what they're
Genuinely
doing.
interested. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, if not, because it just passes them by and they don't even see it.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's why I say one of my sons, I was like, you're looking down at the screen, you're not seeing the
The
world,
whole
right?
world's passing you by. I know. I said this, and my kids will be watching TV with me, even TV. I mean, something educational, let's say. I look
Right.
over and they're like this. I'm like, well, aren't you? Yeah, yeah, I'm watching, Dad. I'm like, no, you're not.
Right.
What did she
Exactly.
just say? You know, and they don't know, but they
Right.
do, but they almost get trained to do that. Like they can get by. It's not good. I'm not suggesting it's good. They can get by flipping through their phone and watching TV and having a book next to them at the same time, thinking they're multitasking and they're not.
Right.
You know, want to hear
I
a
know.
funny thing? I was in the, this is terrible to say on mic, but I was in the men's room the other day and
Okay.
there was a gentleman at the urinal with the phone in his hand,
Oh no.
flipping through his phone.
Oh no.
This person had to be on their phone so much
Oh
that they
no.
couldn't take a break for the bathroom.
That's when you say you need to find
You
times
need
to
to
breathe
talk to
in your
somebody. Really. I
Yes.
didn't know him, so I just left. But
Deep breaths, and hey, if it's required in the urinal, that's where you do it. Find your times for deep breaths
yeah,
during.
don't look at your phone. So that's
Yeah.
a little advice
Oh,
for
too
everybody. But
funny.
yeah, I think that those are all very good observations as to how you got to where you are, because there was I can see there was a theme, there was a trend.
There actually was. I
Yeah.
never could have scripted it ahead of time, but it was
No,
there.
but it pushed you in that direction. Yeah, because you're
Yeah.
interested in
Yeah.
it. Okay. So you're at AT&T and now you discover, so then what happens next? You discovered that, oh my goodness, these people that need these resources, they're not available.
They're not available. Exactly. So I went to, conferences, did a lot more research, and actually started initially bringing some things in that were available from overseas, and then kind of getting to know the market a little bit more, getting to know, people in the schools, and then starting to create some of our own materials.
Now, but at this
And
time, you weren't, I don't know what year this was, but you weren't going on Google,
no,
right?
no,
No.
no. Yeah, it was so different. Well, but again, I don't know how old you are, but in my day, we learned how to do research
Yeah, we
off
did.
of
We
the
learned.
computer,
We did. We learned.
off
And
of
when
the
I was in law
computer.
school, it was like LexisNexis and all the books.
Yes.
It was like a
Yeah.
transition. There were some computers, but there were still
Right.
books. Like you would go to the
Right.
library and look
Right.
things up. I don't think you can even do that now. It's so frustrating and so time consuming. You just should do it on a computer
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
because it's
So
all on the computer.
I did work with, some other companies overseas as well. And yeah, when what was interesting is when, it's funny. Again, this was actually before Amazon was big, right? And I remember going to one of my first conferences with, it was a conference for teachers, educators, teachers of English as a second language and
Mhm.
bilingual educators. And I had some, products displayed, and I was at this conference
What
talking
products
to
did you
them.
have at the time?
It was, so it was some bilingual materials that I had gotten from overseas.
Got it.
And that's when I realized, yeah, there's definitely a need. I mean, they were flocking about, oh, I didn't know I could get this. I didn't know I could get this stuff. And so funny, in the very beginning, there was a little bit of build it and they will come, a little bit of that. And then I think word started to kind of spread. I spent a lot of time early on building a fairly easy to use website. So we
Mhm.
were at that point, I was able to, that was already some years after college. So by then, there were .coms and we were
Right. And there
on,
were skills
we
and
were able.
the tools were there now and
Yeah,
started
yeah.
to be
So we
built.
were
Yeah.
able to, granted, when I look back now, what my website looked like then, it
Well,
was,
the tools weren't there. Yeah.
yeah, it was a little different, but still we made it very easy, and kind of developed a whole process for ordering with schools and libraries, and word started to spread a bit. And, we did more with conferences and, finding other organizations that were kind of involved in this space. So we're actually, like, right now, for example, we're actually sponsors, supporters of this organization that's called Multicultural Children's Book Day.
Mhm.
And it's really trying to increase diversity in children's literature. And there's another group that we also sometimes write for the blog, is We Need Diverse Books, which is actually a large organization now. And I guess somebody had done some research at one point, and I think I think it was 2013, there was about 10% of characters in children's books were non-white.
Right. Either
And
multiracial or
right,
multicultural. Right. Yeah.
so these groups really did a big push to bring more multiculturalism, and are still doing that.
Yeah.
Because
We got a long way to go
and it's
still.
been an amazing success. Like, I think it's gone from about 10% then to, 6 years later or so was like 30%. And it's still not, I mean, I think if you look at the population, it's about half, identify as non-white.
Right.
Right. So it's not at half, but that's something that's like really important to us, because the teachers that we work with now, we work with a lot of teachers that have really high immigrant communities in their
Inner
classrooms.
cities.
Actually, these days, not
Not
only
always.
inner
Not
city,
always,
it's
yeah.
really, you have a lot of ethnic populations that have gone to various
Yeah.
communities,
Different pockets in different places.
things that you wouldn't necessarily even, think of. Like in Minnesota, for example, there's a big Hmong population, there's a big Somali population. And so, they need books in their languages, right? And there was
You'd
just
think
not a
if you're
lot in their
from
languages.
Somalia, you wouldn't be ending up in Michigan. Like, that must be a culture shock.
Yeah, and there are,
know?
it's really interesting when you read some of the historic reasons behind some, and then
Right.
sometimes when it's a small group goes, then others will go because
Follow.
they
Yeah.
have family there,
Family there,
and
sure.
they'll go. I remember growing up in Boston. So actually my mother was a dentist, and she had a dental office in Boston. I used to work with her there, like kind of summer jobs. And there was actually a large Vietnamese population of
Mhm.
Vietnamese immigrants, like the Vietnamese boat people, essentially.
Right. From the
working
other
there.
wrong side of the country. You'd think they would be on the
Well,
West
right, you would
Coast.
say, exactly.
Right.
Now, the West Coast also has a large population of them,
Right.
but it is, it's not always where you'd expect it. And so anyway, so we've been working a lot with teachers now to try to provide resources that will both show the language, and so people can use them in classrooms, build lending libraries so they can read it at home with their families, etc. But also that the kids kind of see themselves in the books.
Well, that's always important. Now,
Yeah.
is that more at the primary levels, primary grades, or are we talking, history teachers in middle and high school?
Yeah, more often our materials are more focused on elementary and preschool. That said, we do work with like some middle school and high school teachers too, especially if the children are very new and they don't, speak
Right.
it
They
well
weren't
enough.
born here. They were brought over with their parents or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have some books that are more like simplified, like myths and legends, or even world folk tales and fables. Like, to me, that's something at any age. Like, I love world folk tales and fables, so some of the books are more little kid like, but other books could be used by, somewhat older children who just aren't at the reading level of, their grade level.
Got
let's
it.
say.
Now, back then, was it called Learning Lizard then? I mean,
Language Lizard.
Language Lizard.
Yeah,
What did
Language
I say?
Lizard. Yes,
I said Learning Lizard. I meant
yes, yes.
It's Friday. It's the afternoon. It's been a long day.
There was a reason for Language Lizard.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you.
There was actually some
I got the
thought
language
put into
part,
that.
but I want to know where the lizard came
The
from.
lizard, yes.
Yeah.
It was not completely random.
Okay.
So, I was thinking our company, right, is all about diversity and children from, different parts of the world. And so, kind of thinking, well, what would fit with that? And again, doing some research, and lizards They are over 3,000 species of lizards. They are all over the world, except
that's
in
true.
like polar regions.
Right, where they can't survive.
They actually have different personalities. They actually can be very intelligent even.
Yeah.
And so there's just so many varieties and sizes and
So
colors
it kind
and
of fit.
personalities. So
Yeah.
it kind of fits with this concept of, kids, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Okay.
So
So from almost the beginning, though, I mean, you went to these conferences and you were looking at, selling these materials. You had a company, you had set it up. It wasn't just like you trying to hawk some stuff and then you like welcome and say, wow, we better like form a company. It wasn't like that. You were more planned out than that.
Oh yeah. Early on, before I was going to the conferences, yeah, it was
Yeah.
already getting, really getting set up. And I also set us up that, I don't know, I wanted to be able to build a company that was different than the traditional company. And it's funny saying this now, the year of COVID, but I wanted to make also opportunity that you didn't have to sort of sit in a corporate office, that we could have some flexibility, that there
Right.
could be opportunities for other people who maybe I was actually building a family then as well, and so
Yeah, you wanted the flexibility of being I mean, that's one of the advantages of being in your own business.
Exactly. So even now it's, a somewhat bigger team, but the team, it's like I always say, our work is really important. Our customers are really important. We're very customer focused, but at the same time, like we do all have lives, outside of that. And it's important to, for me, it's important to develop a company where we can feel a sense of balance, and feel like we're doing something that's important for the community. But they were also able to do that and also kind of be there for our families,
Yeah, well, I think a big problem in this country, and maybe we got past a lot of it because of the pandemic, is that we were always living to work. You work,
Yes.
you work, you work, you work, you work. Why are you leaving at 6 o'clock? And in other countries, at least my experience, I don't travel the world like you have, but in other countries, they work to live. They take off, they're home for dinner. They have, they go back to work, whatever. And life doesn't center around work. Work centers around life, which is kind of what happened. People are kind of realizing like where their values should be, as opposed to just dropping dead one day at work after having worked, say 80 hours a week forever.
Yeah, well,
what are you doing it for,
It does. Well, first of all, let me say it does depend on the country. Now in Japan, they
true.
actually had a word
They
called
work harder,
karoshi,
right?
which was translated as death by overwork.
Oh, that's perfect.
So there was actually a word for that.
That's true. I know it's very competitive over there. High school's very very competitive. You
Yeah,
don't get into the right high school. So you're right. There are exceptions to that. But in general, like in Europe, I find that
yes, like they tend to be. But it's really interesting because this year has changed things. I had a call just the day before yesterday, actually, with a woman from a literacy organization that we work with. And we had this call scheduled, and she ended up she had like her baby there. And she said, I'm sorry, my baby's usually napping during this time, but my husband's work. I said, no problem. We can have our conversation. Her baby was amazing. But she told me then, she said, her husband obviously working at home now too, because of COVID. And she said her husband told her it was the first time ever, the first year ever, that he said his colleagues even acknowledged that he had a family.
Yeah.
Because he'd be on calls. And in her case, she had younger children. My children are a little older, but you can't silence them, right? I mean, when you have little kids and you're on conference calls, this year, and he said it was the first year that they even acknowledged that. And I thought, that's kind of, it doesn't surprise me because I get it, but
because you go off to work and you get to work and that's, but it is sad and it's better. Like I've had little faces pop up like in the middle of interviews and stuff like, oh, this is my daughter, my wife has to be out or whatever, or vice versa. But yeah, I think that's what I mean. Like we are getting to the point where people are now recognizing, and hopefully companies are recognizing, that we're human beings and we have families and we want to procreate and we want to move life ahead. Yes. Like without the with the people and no company, we still have the people, but with the company and no people, you don't really have a company.
Right.
So, and I don't think we recognize that, at least not that I saw in the United States growing up.
Before, I would agree. In my previous jobs, I would agree that was the case. And
it's all about the company.
Yeah, Exactly.
you
And look,
know?
I mean, we are so multidimensional, right? And look how well people have actually done and managed through this. I'm saying obviously some people lost their job, which is terrible, but I'm saying people who did, it very stressful in some cases, I think, especially for people who had young children,
Right.
but people managed it,
There's no
and
question
are
about it.
managing it.
Yeah, and I
They're
think they're
able to.
doing. I think look, there's been more businesses formed and started during the pandemic, I think, than in the last 5 years.
Is that
People,
so?
yeah,
Oh,
people are
I
well,
didn't know
and
that.
some of them may be like side gigs and they're going back to
Right,
work and they're
right,
still doing
right,
it. But yeah, there's people that have said, you know what, I've been killing myself. I've been thinking to go out on my own. Well,
right,
now I'm doing. Here's my permission slip
right,
to do
right.
it. Because if you failed, you can say, well, it was because of COVID. I had to
That's
do
true.
it because my company was shut down, whatever.
That's
A lot of
true.
people are
That's
afraid of
true.
that stuff, and that's what I think held people back.
Yeah.
But we're getting off the topic because I
Yeah.
love all the stuff that you're doing. So
Okay.
so we know why it was called Learning Lizard, and you did
Language lizard, language lizard.
Oh,
Yeah.
see, I did that backwards. I think I'm a little dyslexic, to be honest with you. My younger one's dyslexic. I
No
think maybe I'm
problem.
dyslexic. I really do. I think because learning what her issues were and working with her tutors, I was learning things and looking at things. I'm like, you know what? I think I had that problem when I was young. Like, because in those days, they're like, he's a
They
slow
didn't.
reader or whatever, I was always
Yeah.
the last kid to finish in class. I could read a page and then not know what I read, had to go back. I was just not
Right.
very good with that kind of stuff. So, okay. So language lizard.
Yes.
Now, did you write, I always ask this question, did you write a business plan when you were putting stuff together?
Um, so that's actually a great question.
Yeah.
I did. Okay, so having gone to business school, I should
Not
have
a
had a
bad
very
answer to this
detailed.
question.
No. I probably should have had a very detailed one, but I would say I had a rough outline business
Yeah,
plan.
you had a working
Yes.
something or other.
And calculations were very, back of the envelope, pulling out of the air kind of calculations, if I'm
Right.
perfectly honest.
Yeah,
Because
but you're doing your financial stuff. You're doing your marketing stuff.
yes,
You're
trying
figuring
to
it
put
out
it
whether it
out
makes
there.
sense. Yeah.
Yes, but then you're also learning so much. Like I feel like if I had, so, again, coming from consulting where we really did like a lot of analysis, a lot of analysis before you
Yeah,
move
that's the
forward.
consulting world. Sure.
Yeah. And everything, all the I's would be dotted, all the T's would be crossed, honestly, if I had taken that mindset to starting my company, I don't think
You would
we
never gotten
started, or
Yeah.
it would have been years and years and years
That's a
later.
very good observation because I think what people, first of all, I'm a big advocate of business plans. People should have plans, but I think they're more like what you say they are versus the way people traditionally think of a business plan because there's too many things going on. There's never a point in which you can stop and say, okay, this is what it should look like because in 10 minutes, something's
Right.
going to change. And I
Right.
think people shy away from doing the kind of planning they should do because that frightens them because they don't know where to get started. They don't know how to stop and
Right.
write down some things. And meanwhile, you're doing all this stuff. I bet you if we took it together and we put it all in an envelope, it would be a business plan.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
it was just
exactly.
ongoing
Yes.
constantly.
And it wasn't jumping in, but when I look now, I'm like, gosh, I learned, you learn so many things then that have to change it and adapt the plan. And,
Right. But you have to do the work. You have to do the marketing work, do the I don't care if they're on a
yes.
napkin or not, but people don't do that. They just start. That's where the accidental entrepreneur, the idea came from. They just start.
They just start.
They go buy some product. They hire somebody. They think it's a great idea. They don't do the market
Right.
research. They don't do the calculations. They think if they make $1, they made $1, but they might have
Right.
lost
So in that
$1.50. I don't
sense,
know.
yes. In that sense, I was not accidental.
Right. You were much
I
more
guess I was
calculating
not
about it.
accidental.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I could look at the old, sort of rough business plan and say, wow, it's like very little, or it's so different than what we
Yeah,
are
but now
now.
your business is materialized to where you really, if you could write a business plan in terms of where you want to go the next 10 years, because you
Yes.
have time behind you to look back.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
My law practice is the same way. I couldn't write a business plan when I first got started. I don't know what the hell I was doing. Yeah. Exactly.
And then there's an element of just, the risk taking, of kind of jumping in and trying things sometimes.
You definitely have to try
and
things.
I think in big companies, you tend to make sure everything's right, cover your ass a little bit, make sure. But I mean, that's what I actually love that about a small company and running my own company is I can say like, I think this is a good idea based on my general, research and kind of the numbers I've looked at. I think it is, but I don't know for sure. So I'm going to give it a try, maybe a smaller scale of it. And then you know what? If it doesn't work out, it's on me. But you know what? I learned something from
Well,
that.
everything's a learning
You
experience, right?
know?
There's no failures. There's just opportunities to learn. I mean, that's my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that you try and make a calculated risk. You do your research, and then you try and make a decision to mitigate your risks. So saying, okay, well, let's try this, but let's do it this way. So this way, if it doesn't work out, we only end up with a warehouse of 10,000 units instead of 100,000 units,
Right,
whatever it
right,
is.
right. You don't want to overdo the things
Right.
that you're just trying, but at least you
Right.
can try it. You don't need to get a whole bunch of people, giving your approvals and all that. So let's try it. And if it works, we'll do more of it. If it doesn't work, well, now we learn that doesn't work. So there's been a lot of that.
Yeah.
Just
Well, I think a lot of people make decisions very much by the seat of their pants. They were, all those books like Blink, and
right, right.
I love Malcolm Gladwell, but I'm having a guy on, he's not a professor. Maybe he's a scientist. I don't know, whatever, a PhD, in a couple of months. I just talked to him about my podcast, and he has written books about the fact that making decisions in the blink of an eye, like going with your gut,
Oh, right,
is a
right.
really bad way, like, to make decisions in general. And you're not really going with your gut. You're doing research and then making your best educated guess you can, and then taking a chance. That's different, where people going, you know what? I feel good about this. And they just go.
Right,
9 times
right.
out of 10, it doesn't work out so well.
But see, I had to learn almost the opposite. I had to learn to trust my gut more.
Yeah.
And again,
Maybe,
I don't
yeah.
mean, like you said,
No,
I
because you're an analytic and you're working in the business consulting business.
Yeah,
It's analytical in itself, in its nature.
And that's still sometimes a discomfort, it's just like, okay, what is my gut telling me, but based on everything I've looked at. Actually, my son said something interesting. He said, a good way to understand what your gut is if you have a decision, you write your pros and cons of each decision, and then you still can't quite decide. So you take a coin and say, okay, if it's heads, I'm going to go with A. If it's tails, I'm going to go with B. And if you flip the coin and you feel like kind of happy with the result, then if you flip the coin and it's like you kind of feel as
wish it landed the other way,
then actually your gut's telling you the other.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? Trying to make decisions, but you still want to mitigate your risks, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people do things by the seat. They call me and they're like, I gotta shut my business down. It's been 4 months. I'm like, 4 months. Like, what?
Yeah.
And they don't have a business plan. They don't have anything in writing.
Yeah. So you're right. I think it's what perspective you're coming from. So some people need to learn that part, get more analytic. Others with the analytic background have to be able to learn to trust their gut a little bit more.
Well, because most entrepreneurs are very right brain. I mean, even you're an analytic, but you're very right brain because you're creative. You want to be creative. I do too. You want to create this and that. And you got to take a step back sometimes and say, don't keep being creative. Don't be afraid of the numbers.
Right.
Is this a good decision or a bad decision?
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Okay. So let's talk about then the progression of the company. So what year was this when you really launched the company?
In 2005. So actually, we just celebrated our 15th anniversary.
Oh, very good. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and this has been, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, this has been probably the most interesting, but also kind of exciting year that we've had.
You're talking about COVID.
Yeah. The past couple of years, but this past year was really challenging, right? Because
the schools were all closed.
The libraries were closed, and those are pretty much our biggest customers, and so we really, did it hit us? Yeah, it hit us because the schools and libraries weren't thinking about buying books they were thinking about a lot of other important things. And so we really started focusing on okay, what do we know? We had been doing some surveys already. What do we know our customers are looking for? Right. What's going on? What is going to be something that when we get out of this, that customers are going to be interested in and need? So we kind of looked back. We had done surveys on, what languages are we not offering that maybe have a demand. So I had mentioned, for example, Hmong, right, in Minnesota, right? That's a language that we started to do a lot more of this year because we had been starting to get more and more comments about there's very little available in Hmong. There's not good quality materials in Hmong. And
where's Hmong from, the language?
So it's a lot of people that came from like Laos. Laos,
Sure.
and parts of China as well. And so, so I think just again, we're really so of course we do stuff in Spanish, we do things in Chinese, we do things in Arabic,
Right.
so those are some of the, let's say, bigger second languages, French, even
Yeah, because
German.
population sizes. Sure.
Yeah, but we also are trying to be able to reach the populations that have the smaller groups of immigrants. And sometimes not that small. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of Vietnamese, but trying to also, but what's nice is for teachers, if they can get the same resource in many different languages, they can use that in class in like a number of ways. So we look, so sometimes, well, I don't know. Can I show you some of the things
Yeah,
now?
sure.
Yeah.
Now let me
So,
ask you a question while you're
okay.
pulling your stuff up.
Yeah.
The teachers aren't bilingual generally, right? So how are
Right.
they using the materials then?
Okay. So some of the teachers actually are bilingual. So certainly if
Okay.
you're
Well, they
talking
don't teach
Spanish,
Hmong, do they?
so typically they're no.
Right.
All right.
Right.
But you'd be surprised, like a lot of areas where there's a larger population, they might have bilingual teachers that do speak that second language. But again, oftentimes it will allow the teacher to use, so all of our materials are bilingual. So
Okay.
it's never just has that second language. It
I
always has
see.
English in it. So what they can often do is they can read something in English and then the child will have it in their second language, or they can bring it home and read it in their second
So
language.
it's comparative.
So it's comparative. So it's the
Got
same
it.
story. And so again, like one book, so even if it's, say, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, which we have that
Okay,
book,
good
right?
example. Okay.
They could read that and we have it in, say, 20 different language editions, all with English. So even the kids could come and bring it home with them in the language of their parent
And
and
they
read
can
it with
follow
their
along.
parent.
Right.
Yeah. So it also really helps promote like the homeschool connection, which is also shown, just parents being involved. Well, you're a parent, parents being involved in education, just that factor alone influences the success of a child in
Of
school.
course. And if the
Just that.
parents can't help because they don't really understand English, they're going to shy
Exactly.
away from it. Yeah.
And they feel completely disconnected.
Right.
So actually we've done a lot also. So not only, so what we've been doing in addition to creating the books and offering the books is we've been developing a lot of multicultural lesson plans. And so the idea is, here's not just a book, but here's a lesson plan that will help a teacher utilize this book in a diverse classroom. And as part of that, it will bring in cultural elements into the lesson plan. And it will also suggest ways like, getting a parent to perhaps read this particular book in their home language and maybe
Right.
record it, and or come into the class if they can, because it's amazing how much that makes a student feel like their culture or their language is appreciated, especially
Sure.
talking elementary school kids.
Very
They
much
feel
so.
really, they feel much more included. And so, we've seen, and I've also heard it anecdotally from teachers, that when they have these books in the classroom or they're using these books and the kids' language is in there, or the cultural stuff we talk about in the lesson plans is in there, the kids are being much more, they're engaged. Exactly. And so, and also what we're developing is, the books themselves could be multicultural. So I think a good way to show it is, let me show you an example. So last year we came out with these books like idioms, right? So everybody, every kid around third, fourth grade learns about figurative language and they learn about idioms. Okay. And which is kind of saying one thing, but meaning something else. And I'll show
Right.
you
I
a
was going
couple
to say, because
examples.
for people listening, we should
May
tell
not
them what
know.
idioms
Yes.
are.
In
Right.
fact, I can read the exact definition of
It's
idiom,
like
but
a
I'm gonna,
phrase that means something. Yeah. Go ahead.
that means something different than what it says. So I'm going to
Right.
show you a couple examples, and then I'm going to show you how we've taken this idea of teaching idioms, with every school does, right? My kids all learned idioms. There was nothing multicultural about the way they learned idioms.
Now, are idioms like common to English, and it makes English
No.
hard, or all cultures have idioms?
Every culture, I think, has
Okay.
idioms, right?
Okay.
But so now you have all these English language learners, right?
Right.
And it's already hard enough to learn literal language. So now you're getting
Right.
this
Of course. Then you're
figurative
reading
language.
stuff in there. Yeah. I've seen. You want to hear a funny story? So there was a guy who's from Poland or Russia or something. He's an attorney. We had something recently about something that happened to you when it was embarrassing. So he went to the doctor his first time. He's visiting the doctor. Does he speak English? Well,
Okay.
and the doctor said, when was the last time you had a bowel movement? Well, he thought that was something bad. So he says, oh, at least not a year. And the doctor prescribed all kinds of medications for him,
Oh my gosh.
made
Okay.
him very sick.
And that wasn't even an idiom, right? That was
Right.
actually
That was a
literal.
cultural, yeah, he didn't
Yeah,
know because it's not,
a
that's a
cultural
language thing. But yeah, I can
Exactly.
imagine if somebody says something, you think it means X, and it
And
does
it means
literally
Y.
mean X. Yeah, that's problematic.
Exactly. So
Very
what
tough.
we did was we came out with 4 books, okay? And they're each about idioms, and they're available not only in English, but with explanations and translations in them. So as an example, we have one that's about nature idioms. So
Okay.
fresh as a daisy. And I'll show you a couple example
Oh,
pages
there's a
and to
good
show them
one.
all.
Fresh as a daisy.
This one is Telugu, an Indian language. That's the script you see. It's icing on the cake, right?
Okay.
Here's the lion's share. It's animal idiom. So we have one on food, one on animals, one on nature, and then here's one color idioms. So
Okay.
I'm going to show you an example. So you might have already noticed from the covers that they're multicultural, right?
Right.
But if I take an example page, let's say this page, okay, this has got Japan in here. So a golden opportunity, which means what? It doesn't mean an opportunity that's actually colored golden. It means an
No.
excellent opportunity that does not happen often.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the picture, I had a golden opportunity to take lessons with an expert musician. And so what you've got here is not only is it explaining the meaning in their language,
Right.
okay, but also for a multicultural classroom, you're seeing a traditional Japanese instrument, the koto, a girl just in traditional Japanese dress, so you're getting some multiculturalism right in the pages. Here's another one, like once in a blue moon.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Something that happens very rarely.
Right.
So my grandmother bakes lotus blossom cookies once in a blue moon.
Right. Because
So
blue moons
now-
don't happen very much.
So now, if you're a kid from
Now, is that Japanese in there? Is that Arabic?
This language that you're seeing is actually Arabic.
Yeah.
But we're talking about lotus blossom cookies, which is something that's actually popular in like Thailand. It's a popular sweet. So now, not only are you perhaps, responding to the student who's Arabic speaking, because you got the book, but now what if there's a Thai kid? Oh, lotus blossom cookies. What are those? Let's talk about that. Let this kid tell us something about their culture. And so we're really trying to, bring the multiculturalism into the book in every aspect of the book. And then even like it comes with a lesson plan. So when teachers get this, there's like a QR code they can scan that comes with a specific lesson plan and all these activities about idioms. So again, looking at my kids, when they learned idioms, they had to do fill in the blanks with idioms. So we have activities, they're fill in the blanks with idioms from these books. But the fill in the blank is, one of them is a fill in the blank story about the Holi festival in India. One is a fill in the blank about animals in South America. One is about the Hanami festival, cherry blossoms, the cherry blossom viewing in Japan, which is a big thing. So the idea with a lot of our materials and our lesson plans is that you are teaching the content. You are teaching the content you need to do, but now you're doing it in a way that's culturally responsive to a classroom that is diverse. And not only is it making the kids in the classroom who are maybe not from the majority culture feel welcome and get more engaged, but you're also helping all the students learn more about other cultures and, just learning more about their peers, about other language, other cultures. And I remember a while back, there was a Fast Company article that was talking about like what it takes to succeed. And one of the things was being able to motivate a diverse workforce. And I think the second thing was being able to understand other cultures. And the whole list had to do with being able to communicate effectively with people who are different than you, having an open mind, and those are the things that we're trying to do in this book, in these books is really and the lesson plans is for the whole classroom to become more welcoming, more understanding, including a range of cultures, understanding diversity, not just accepting it, but kind of celebrating it, and making all the kids feel welcome, accepting differences, not being colorblind. Some people talk about being colorblind, and that we don't prescribe to that. It's more about accepting differences, highlighting diversity, but without judgment.
Right,
because
right.
again, back to this thread that was through my whole life, that adds a tremendous richness, and getting all
Sure.
these different perspectives
Right.
is really important. So we let's see, I don't know how much more time I have, but I have a couple
We're
other,
good.
so
We got time. I'm not going
okay,
anywhere, but I do have a couple
okay,
questions for you while you're looking.
okay,
I have two business questions for you. One
okay.
is the district your customer? Like, are you dealing with the district? Can the teachers use your materials on their own in the classroom? What's the
Yeah, so you know what? That's the really challenging thing about working with schools in this
right?
country is
Yeah.
it varies so much. Sometimes teachers will buy their own materials. First of all, sometimes they're spending their own money on the materials, but sometimes they are the decision makers. But then other
So
times,
depending
even
on the
though
district, sometimes they give them some control over.
yeah, so so sometimes it's the teacher sees it, they see what they want, they go to and they still have to go through a formal
Right, but
purchase
they
order
push the
process.
process.
Yes, but they push the process. Other areas, sometimes it's more like there's more centralized decision makers that are maybe buying for a bunch of schools that have, say, a high ESL, English language learner
Right,
population.
right. So they're
So it
putting out
really does
looking for
vary.
materials, right?
But then it's not just schools, it's also like actually libraries have been amazing customers, because if you think about the library, what's their role? Is really to meet and support their community. So if
Right.
you have a very diverse community, we have even my own library, the Basking Ridge Library, they've been great. They purchase a lot of materials for other language speakers and, put them in their shelves. And so libraries have also been really amazing at trying to respond to the different language needs in their communities.
Now, how do you create the materials? If they're in different
How?
languages. Yeah. I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not like they're long, like novels, but
Right, right. Well, we do work. I mean, we have a very extensive network of like translators. So, for
got it.
example, with each of these books, we have two translators usually per book. So, we'll have someone do an initial translation, someone will check the translation. If they don't agree on something, they'll discuss it, try to come up with the right one, particularly something like with idioms where it's maybe a little more challenging. But actually, for all our books, I just think it's good to have two translators. And then
And they're virtual,
we
right?
have
They could be
somebody
anywhere
return.
in the world
Yes,
working
and
with
they
you.
are. We, because of where we are. I mean, a lot are in the US, are from immigrant
Right, but
communities
they're
in the
not
US,
down the street.
but no, they're definitely
Right.
not. No. And
Right.
sometimes certain languages can be challenging to find.
Yeah.
And we've had, well, going back to Hmong again, that was a
Yeah.
really challenging one for us to
I'm
find.
sure.
And we actually ended up finding some great translators through this organization, We Need Diverse Books, who has their own newsletter. And we finally said, look, we want to do this. We're really having a hard time finding like good translators, because I don't usually like to go just to like a translation company. We like to have someone that has some like education background and things. And so they actually posted something for us, and we got some great responses because they had Hmong speakers that were actually, on their newsletter list. So that helped us. But that can be challenging. But once you do it,
Yeah.
and
Well, then they're
we've
part of
been
your
a lot
team,
of
right?
we generally get the repeat translators, for the most part.
Now, what about the illustrations? Who does all that stuff?
And that we work again with different illustrators. Have gotten them various ways, but yeah, I'm not the illustrator. I told you I like to doodle. I've
Right.
never
No,
been
I
the
figured as
illustrator, and
much.
I will never be the
You're the
illustrator.
president of the company. You shouldn't be
Will
doing
never
that
be the
stuff, really.
illustrator.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
So what else are you going to show me? You were gonna show
so
me something?
another thing we did recently, and then I'll show you one more that's super,
Okay.
super
Cool.
relevant.
I
So
love
just
it.
tell me if I've only got a minute left.
No,
or
we're
something.
good.
Okay.
No, my Zoom account's not going to run out and cut us off.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay. So, there's been all these issues about like racial justice, obviously over the past year plus.
Right.
And even now, I don't know if what you're seeing in the paper, but about, a
Yeah,
lot
the
of
Asian
Asian
community, it's
communities,
terrible.
et cetera. And it's terrible.
Yeah.
And so, again, I always look at these things like, okay, what can I do to help this situation? Okay, I can protest. That's one thing I could do. But maybe that's not the best use for me of my time or my talents. And so we actually came up with a series, and we call it the Living in Harmony series. Okay. And it's got, and the idea here was to really get kids at a very young age starting to just think about these ideas of diversity and respecting diversity, and how we're all we're all unique, but we have so much in common, and we can all be friends. And so this one, so it's all kind of themes of unity, kindness, harmony. And so let's see, I know you like to see what the language is. Okay, so this
Yeah.
one is Burmese.
Okay.
Which I think is the coolest looking language.
Yeah. It looks similar. Yeah. It looks, like Arabic.
It's a neat
kind of
looking
little bit.
language. So this one is We Can All Be Friends.
Okay.
And so this one is kind of showing how much we have in common, even though we're all different, and we can all be friends. Then there's one that focuses more on kindness, right? And so this one is actually looking at kindness, different acts of kindness, but around the world. So it's looking at, so again, you're seeing characters and settings around the world and giving different examples of how kids can be kind. So again, young kids can start thinking about that and how can I be kind? How can I make a difference? And then this one is Who Are We? And this is Amharic, which is actually spoken in Ethiopia. And this book helps them to understand and appreciate the diversity in our community. So it kind of talks about, who are we? We're many faces, we're many religions, we're many, or many faiths, many different kinds of families. But when we come together, but we have, we all believe in change and forgiveness and helping each other. And when we come together, we're actually stronger together. Right. So again, when we put these together, we put them together with an entire lesson plan to help cover these topics of diversity and unity. So a teacher can really take this and even look at, there's descriptions of each illustration. So like this one, again, is the Holly Festival, right? So a teacher might not necessarily know that, but if they've got the lesson plan, they can see this was actually from one of the pages in the book that's We All Celebrate. And, but it's showing We All Celebrate, and it's showing the Holly Festival. So now they can also take this and start talking about, oh, this is a festival that's celebrated in India. What other festivals do we celebrate? Oh, we all celebrate, but oh, your family celebrates something different than our family. Well, that's not a bad thing. That's an interesting thing, right? So they're learning about each other's cultures.
I would think one of the frustrating things is that a lot of where this racial discourse and cultural problems, hatred is coming out of these communities that aren't exactly embracing using the materials that you're producing. I mean, there's a lot of, Midwest white communities that are definitely not using stuff like this in the classroom with the kids. And that's the frustrating part, right?
And yeah, you hope that they will.
And it bleeds down at some point.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It is
not
true
that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. I mean, we're going to always promote cultural and racial diversity and all that kind of stuff and get over the problems. But I mean, I'm Jewish, and they had attacks on temples and churches, and you've seen it all, and synagogues. And when I lived in the Midwest, even in Ohio for a couple of years, there was a lot of, my wife's half Italian. There was a lot of racial, cultural, and religious misunderstandings, let's put it that way, that they didn't understand.
It's really interesting sometimes, and maybe you had these conversations with your kids too, but sometimes when I talk to my kids, because, they have grown up in a scenario where, we have different races.
Yeah, they got friends with two moms and friends that have mixed marriages. And they don't even think twice about it.
They see some of this stuff on the news and they're like, but why?
They don't get it.
Why does it matter? Like, why does it matter that person's black? Why?
Right. Why did that guy
why
kill
is that so important to some people? Right. Yeah. And so, I actually have a lot of faith in this, like this.
I mean, that doesn't mean you stop doing what you're doing. I'm just curious as to, it's just frustrating. When you look around, that the people that really need to change are not the ones that
are not. And and that's the way it is so often in life. The people that need to hear the message aren't the ones going on the calls or listening to the podcast to hear the message.
Correct.
But, I guess we can do what we can do. Right.
There's still people that think the earth's flat. So
exactly. We try to move the needle, you hope. I mean, that's honestly with my goal, my thought with reaching people when they're young is maybe you can move the needle, and it may be 10 years before those people.
That's what it's, because our kids are going to grow up as adults in a very different world and a different view of the world than we did.
Exactly.
And we grew up in a different world than our parents did.
Exactly. So there's one other one I just want to show you because it's so timely. I
think your lack of enthusiasm for what you do is really the problem. If you want to boil it down, is that you're just not into what you do. It was a bad choice. You got to change what you're doing.
Okay, that's funny because I know it's true. When I start talking about this stuff, it's like,
Hey, passion breeds success. If you're really not passionate about what you do, you're probably never going to reach the levels you want to reach, and help the people you want to help and all that stuff.
Yeah. So this one I'm going to show you next. I'm so like personally passionate about. But we were seeing, and this one was actually bred out of COVID.
Okay.
And it's something we created. We've probably the most quickly we've put together something. We really put a lot of resources into it in a quick time period. But, we were seeing a lot about what was happening about the disproportionate impact of COVID on minority communities. You're seeing what's happening with like a lot of vaccine hesitancy,
Right.
and things like that. And we actually created a book. Let's see, I think I only have, okay, I have the English version and here's an English Spanish version. I will show
Okay.
you the cover
Oh,
first.
Vaccines
And
Explained.
it's
Okay.
Vaccines Explained. And
A lot of adults should read that book.
well, interesting you say that, because so it does. It explains, it looks at vaccines, their history, why they're important, just some basic education. Then it gives a lot of resources. We also developed a lesson plan, around it for teachers to use in the classrooms. And again, multicultural families displayed throughout the whole book. So kids will see themselves in the book. And interesting you say about a lot of adults should read it, because we work closely with an organization that basically brings books, kind of promotes preschool literacy. And so brings books into low-income communities, gives the books to the families,
Sure.
teaches the parents how to use the books with the kids. And they work with a lot of immigrants as well. And so they saw this book and they said, we need to get this in the communities, because we've been having discussions of how do we inform these families, about the vaccine? How do we get them to understand the vaccine and the importance, and just sort of promote it? And so if you have it where you're bringing it into a home and the parent is reading it to the kid,
They're both learning.
they're both learning. And
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, even we actually, for this one, we worked with an expert from Rutgers University Global Urban Health Department.
Sure.
And I'll say, there's a couple of data points I learned in there
I'm sure.
about
I'm sure.
vaccines. So I don't say, so this one, honestly, we probably would not normally target to a 2 to 4 age group like this organization that goes to preschool. But in this particular case, it's like, well, yeah, maybe the young kid's going to gather a few things. They're probably hearing about vaccines. So they get a little information, but the families will learn it and it will just start the conversation, because it's amazing the amount of like vaccine hesitancy. And it's just really important, I think, to get this,
Well, you look at the history of
accurate information.
Back when when we started developing vaccines back in, I don't know, 40s, the 30s, whatever. And there was like, logistic problems. There was production problems. There were people that got sick. Like none of that stuff exists anymore, but it just stuck with our society as to that these things are all dangerous. And now I realize we rushed this to market. I understand that, but we also had like every major scientific research group working together. And that's why there've been so few side effects. There will always be side effects of medications that people take, but people aren't dropping dead in the streets because of this vaccine.
Because the vaccine. And that's what, I heard, I was actually on a kind of webinar, and it was, D.H. Hughley, I think that's his name. He's
a comedian,
right?
Yeah.
And he was actually on
DL,
this
DH,
webinar.
yeah.
DL, maybe it's DL
DL,
Hughley,
yeah.
And he was on this webinar, and he had actually gotten COVID early on, and said it was like and he's like, I always consider myself a healthy person. He's like, and I got so sick, and he's like, and it took me months and months and months and months till I felt better. So now he's already gotten the vaccine, and he's pretty much out there trying to encourage people to get the vaccine. And what he said is, he's like, I know a lot of people who got really sick and people who died from COVID. He's like, I don't know anybody who died from the vaccine,
Right.
It's like, you just have to kind of like, I get the hesitation. I get this concern that we're, it was put together quickly. It was, a year was remarkable.
Right, but it wasn't haphazard.
But it wasn't haphazard. But I think that there's been so much misinformation. There's been so much mixed messaging in general about the virus from the top. I mean,
the political
so
system has just destroyed this whole thing. It's not a scientific issue. Now it's a political issue. So, congressmen in Washington make scientific decisions. You saw Fauci yesterday talking to Rand Paul, and he's like, it's all theater. And he's like, that's the problem.
Right.
You're the problem. You can't tell people that. You don't work for the CDC and the NIH, and you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, people are listening to the wrong sources of information.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's really, it's amazing. It's been amazing and rather disturbing to watch, you
Yeah,
know,
it is, especially with news
and
being so available.
exactly,
Yeah.
and all the
I
misinformation.
think
So
I've
yeah.
learned that you just don't watch the news, right? Because if it's that bad, you'll hear about it. You don't have to make yourself crazy over half the things that
Yeah.
don't even matter. I think that your book, though, the vaccine book, is an interesting concept because I'm just reading, and I know you probably know this word because you know a lot of things in Japan about Kaizen and the principle of Kaizen, that little things matter.
Ah,
There's
yeah, yeah,
stories of
yeah.
Toyota when they made
Right.
little changes and it changed their whole company, and what they did in the subways when Bratton took over the subway system, and he made little changes like they started giving tickets to fare jumpers and the cleaning the thing. And
Right, right.
basically the bigger criminals were like, I don't want to be bothered getting a ticket for jumping a fare. And they stopped doing it. So I think that
Interesting.
like little things like that, like putting books in the hands of little children that have to be read to by their parents, you actually are you're actually teaching the parents just by
Right.
doing that. And I think
Yeah.
that it's
I
the
mean,
things
I
we
hope,
overlook.
I hope it makes a difference. I mean, sometimes I
Yeah.
look at these issues, these societal problems, and it's like, okay, I
Throw
don't
your
work for the
hands up. Right.
CDC. I'm not in certain positions. Is there something I can do here? Is there something I can do to help? And now I feel, I have
You are
certain
helping.
resources. I
Yeah.
have an ability to do certain things that, isn't, like you said, it's not going to reach everybody, but it'll hopefully reach enough people that it makes a difference. And especially with the lesson plans that that's something we've really focused a lot on, and really developed more over the last couple of years, is to really say, look, we're not just a company giving books. We're a company that's promoting culturally responsive classrooms and culturally responsive teaching, and giving them the materials to do that, so that each teacher doesn't have to reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
and we work with, practicing teachers actually write, we work with them to actually write the lesson plans,
Yeah, of
and
course.
and help to, what's the best way for a teacher to be able to use these books to communicate the messages we're trying to communicate.
Right.
And you can do it. You can make a full lesson plan or 3 lesson plans or whatever out of a single book if you have the right materials.
Yeah.
And then now the idea is, well, now you can also take that book and develop a lending library, and your kids who speak different languages can take it home and share it with their parents. And then they can talk about how, hey, mom, did you know this was a picture of the Holly Festival? And we talked about that celebration. Now they're teaching the parents, and the parents involved. And
Yeah,
so
that's what
there's
I mean.
just,
Those little things make a
so
big
many.
difference.
Yeah.
You feel like you
Yeah.
can't make a difference, but it makes bigger difference than you think
Yeah.
than
I
it
hope.
does.
I hope.
Well, I'm sure we could go on for hours to talk about this, but
Yeah, yeah,
I do
yeah.
appreciate you spending all the time with me, and we will put links to the books in the show notes and links to Language Lizard, and I almost said Learning Lizard again, to Language Lizard, and how people can interact with you and learn about what you're doing and hopefully bring it to their community. So Anneke, I thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much for having me. It was great. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Great.